have to thank Nara and Augusto to invite me here because I hadn't met Thenjiwe and Richard before. So it was an introduction to the practice, an introduction as well to have a conversation about making art today. And but first I will give the bios. I am Manuela Moscoso, the Executive Director of CARA, Center for Art Research and Alliances here in New York. And Thenjiwe, she's an artist born in New York in the 1980s. And although she lives in Johannesburg for some time now, she divides her studio work. He divides her time between studio work, performances, and navigating the field of art as social practices. Nkosi, or Thenjiwe, presented equations for a body at rest. I just realized this is very small letter. See my side. At rest at East Side projects and across public spaces in Birmingham, England, as part of the 22 Commonwealth Games. She has solo exhibitions in different places like the Africa Center in New York, the Spitz Bay Gallery in Nashville, notable group exhibitions including the 15th Sartre Biennial, and also Ellie and Edith Road Museum of Art, Michigan, the East Lansing, and the Gallery Queen's University in Belfast, and other places. And Richard Ayodeji Ikhide, he was born in 1991 in Nigeria, although he lives in London for a while now. And he finished and did her BA in textile design in Central St. Martin's University of Art in London, and had a postgraduate diploma in the Royal Drawing School in London. He has done exhibitions in different places like VO Curations in London, and Zablowski Collection as well in London, the John Moore University in Liverpool, and South London Gallery. And he's opening today, right? And you have to say.
So I'm opening a show with Candice Maggie. The show's called Ties That Bind With Time. So I've just had a chat, so a lot of it is focusing on kind of like familial dynamics and relationships. So yeah, if you're around, Freeman Alley, that's where the show will be. PV is 6 to 8 p.m. So
yes.
all are welcome.
Please come. Yay. So I love to celebrate today. Yeah. So the way that we thought about this conversation is that each of the artists will do a presentation around 15-20 minutes. I will keep the time so we have later on a time to speak a little bit about the work, and not only a little bit about the past, but also what they're thinking at the moment and what they are preoccupying in the moment, and where do they see their practice going into the future. So without more overdue, Thenjiwe, I think you start.
Hi. I was trying to think of where to start, because the practice has been my practice has been varied over the years. Sort of started, I started in painting, and then was making a lot of videos, and then decided that I only wanted to make relational work. So for many years the work was just relational, and then I came back to painting in the sort of 2010s as a way of making sense of the relational work that I've been doing. So to think through not just sort of intellectually and sort of reflecting very directly on the work that I've been doing with people and communities, but to use actually painting about some of the ideas around power and visibility and collaboration and individualism versus collectivism. So yeah, to sort of use the subconscious to work through that in painting. And this was one of the first works that I came back to after being working with people and not making objects for a long time. And in college, one of my college friends is here. I was painting a lot of architecture, buildings of Johannesburg that had that were loaded for me. They were sort of vestiges of apartheid. I saw them as that. They'd sort of changed their names, but their purpose and the ownership of, the companies or organizations that they housed were still very linked to apartheid economics and history. So anyway, so I was painting all this geometry. And then I came back to painting, sort of looking for, just in sort of different kinds of architecture. And I was looking at images of sports and landed on a photograph. So I work largely from video stills that I take, but this was a photograph. This was from a photograph that I found of a gymnast in the middle of the floor, either sort of at the end or the beginning of their routine. And so there was like a sort of a formal interest in the architecture of the arena. And then I sort of painted this without thinking too much about it. In my sort of pared down style, I was with the architecture that I was working with in college. I was really interested in how much I could tell you about something with like the least information possible in painting. So everything was always sort of flattened and pared down. But this came out, and it got me thinking about gymnastics. And gymnastics became the subject that I started to work with for a while now. But yeah, sort of 2012, I painted this painting. 2014, I painted this painting. I didn't know exactly what I was talking about yet with gymnastics, and then a whole world opened up for me. So I go to these, it was sort of 2020 when I began the gymnasium series that people are sort of more aware of in terms of my fame. And I started painting the arenas and thinking about them as, like geometric structures, but then like also thinking about, I think about structures from a social perspective, from an architectural perspective, from the structures, the conceptual perspective. So, what are the structures that that determine how we move through the world and how we think about ourselves, and that limit us or give us more space? And so these are sort of imagined arenas. And then this painting came out of me at a time when Simone Biles was sort of, I think it was like the first time that she really stood back and said no to the demands that were being placed upon her by her industry, when she decided to step back from Olympics competing for the first time. And she said she had the twisties, and the twisties, I think people know, is this, maybe not, it's a sort of state that, do you know? That, so when you're performing an airborne move, you have to keep track as a gymnast of where you are in space and time in order to land the move, and safely and correctly. But for me, the thing that I was interested in is that it's such a life and death moment. If when you're in the air, if you lose that sense of where you are, it can determine the rest of your career. It can determine whether you injure yourself fatally. And so this piece was about that sort of loss of sense of self. So I don't know how time is flowing. I'm gonna fine.
Totally not, because
okay, I want to, because I have 10 minutes more. Okay, so I'll move a little bit more quickly. So then, alongside the sort of more abstracted work was this figurative work, and I started thinking about the gymnasts as as artists and performers and people. And there was a very, at this time for me, like a sort of comparison between my experience as an artist, a black artist, an artist that was gaining visibility, and this idea of having to perform something in public, like I am right now, or yeah. So I want to move sort of quickly through some of these because I want to show you some videos that I think also speak to some of the things I'm talking about. So the work became about the sort of community of this very, what I think is seen as a very individualized sport. So the idea that you know, we are through other people, you know, and through our community. And so, and a lot of the work is about these in-between moments. It's never sort of the like apex moment of performance. It's all about the relations and yeah, between people. So this is the first time that I sort of moved into large-scale work. This is at the Hammer Museum. I just completed this work with a lot of help in February.
Yeah, I love the color palettes. Great.
Thanks.
Can I ask you just go back? Is it one plane? Because I see some shadow, or is it like?
Yeah, no, sorry, I got scared about the time, so I'm like,
No, sorry. We want to see it.
So,
yeah.
So this is a cutout actually on the MDF board, and painted on, so it sort of stands. It's sort of sculptural. It's the most sculptural that I get. One plane on top of another, so it's a few inches from the wall. Yeah, and then you know, sort of vinyl, cutout vinyl that extends around the architecture of the space. So for me, it was like I don't know where that is, this image. Yeah, for me, it was this moment of really bringing together my two interests in sort of painting architecture, but then also like playing with the illusion of creating new architectures and having the paintings spill into space. It was really exciting and fun for me. So this is, I just want to show you this video, and then this will sort of mark a turning point in the work that then moves into a different approach, actually. So this is called Suspension, and I'm not going to read everybody's name, but these are all the gymnasts that feature in it. that sound is actually not playing in full. But the piece is, yeah, it's just sort of about this moment before beginning to perform. And it's more or less like this throughout the rest of it. Sort of builds in tension, but you never get the satisfaction of seeing anyone actually start. So it's about the psychological space, and well, you can probably tell what it's about. I'll leave it alone for now. So yeah, after that video, I sort of I started to go back to making films a little bit more often, and as Manuela mentioned, I was invited by Eastside Projects in Birmingham. They're an arts NGO to be a part of the Commonwealth Festival there that runs alongside the Commonwealth Games in 2022. Since the beginning of the Empire Games, as they were called, there's always been a festival that accompanies the Games. And both are a PR tool for Britain, basically. It's just interesting that this precise strategy has persisted over decades. So when I was invited, I didn't want to participate initially. I thought, why should I celebrate the Commonwealth? My country's a part of the Commonwealth. We joined much later, but I just felt like it was a celebration of colonialism and I didn't want to partake. And then I thought, well, it's a public project and it might be a moment to think publicly about what this is. And so I knew a little bit about the Commonwealth but didn't know much, and I decided to take a very sort of, felt like elementary approach and teach myself about the Commonwealth in public. And so this film was one component of things that showed in Birmingham, and then there were a series of posters and a website that was sort of archived all the research that we did. And so I'll quickly show you the film. The film is short, and then I'll run through my paintings that are related to this. Let's hope this plays sound properly. If it isn't playing properly, I might just start again. so just to finish off, these are some of the images that have come out of working through that history and working through that material and sort of imagining sort of an alternate history or future.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Richard, the floor is yours. While Richard makes a computer, I have an anecdote. Is there? When we had our call, it was the earthquake in New York. Remember?
I do. My partner came running saying, "There's an earthquake in New York."
And I was telling
somebody.
It's an earthquake. Richard, it's all yours.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So I didn't, obviously I've just had a baby, sleep deprived, tired. So I literally just got to New York last night. So I was thinking for this, I didn't want to necessarily maybe go through paintings. I was thinking it might be better to kind of just talk you through how I think about maybe creating a piece of work or think about drawing it itself. So I'm going to run through, this is a book that was published in 2021, so it's like a collection of sketchbook pages. So this was done as part of my residency with VO Curations in London. So we produced this book, it's called Yiya. Yiya in Yoruba means to draw, so basically drawing. So I'll kind of, just kind of give you guys a bit of an idea of how I think about drawing and maybe creating work and all that sort of stuff. So for me, the first ever drawing I did, my parents said I was about 5 years old. So drawing has kind of been an essential part of just life for me. Kind of growing up I think it was kind of like a refuge for me in terms of, living through this slightly traumatic family life with my parents. And it was like, you have this place to kind of like escape and, do other things and be yourself in a sense. So it's a sketchbook or keeping some form of a sketchbook has always been a way for me to kind of process things, think about things. So kind of, I was always drawing while doing my textiles course at CSM. And what was interesting in that course is a lot of my practice was leaning towards more of like a fine art, visual based kind of thing, but I was having issues during my time on the course where tutors would say to me, well, you're on the textile course, you're thinking too much like a fine artist. So I've always encountered problems, and it was kind of like, I might have to reassess what it is I'm actually trying to do with this. Do I want to do textiles, or do I want to move into more of a fine art sort of practice? So kind of leaving that course, I did a few internships. They weren't amazing, so I was like, I don't think this is the career path I would like to kind of go into. So, as you do, you working at loads of different art stores, odd jobs. I found out about the Royal Drawing School, and I thought, this could be like a great segue in terms of transitioning into more of a fine art practice. So that was kind of like my entry point into thinking more about fine art. But in terms of my introduction to art, I grew up in the 90s, so video games, comics, that was a lot of my introduction into art. So in terms of I'm interested in sequential art, a lot, this idea of the sequence and how that takes us through. But I think something that kind of underpins my practice is this interest in mythos and mythology, and how our lives are also mythologies in themselves, how your life is a story. So I'm always interested in this idea of how we can, Jung talks about this idea of like, the myth is the subconscious speaking to the ego self, and how we sort of like navigate through these problems, and deal with life. So in the sketchbook, for me, it's a refuge. I always think of my sketchbook as almost like a visual library for myself, where I can kind of record things, play around, and test out different ideas, So these would just be sketches. I might just be playing around, and a lot of the time I'm framing things because I'm thinking in that sort of sequential sense of things maybe like moving on from each other. At one point in time, I was really interested in automatic writing, so I was playing around with just kind of like automatic script, just off the top of my head, seeing what happens and how that all comes together. So during my time at the drawing school, I kind of really got into, so I was looking at artists like Jean Giraud is a French illustrator who was working with, they're called heavy metal comics, so he was making these kind of like comics, these stream of consciousness drawings and stuff, so I was kind of looking at a lot of his work, and going to the drawing school, I'm encountering a lot of European artists, which I wouldn't have known about, you know, some people like the Durers, William Blake was somebody that I really got into at my time in the drawing school, so, because he was all about the imagination and bringing forth from the imagination, so at my time there, I was like, okay, you know, I really want to kind of build this internal microcosm that I'm kind of playing around in, this internal world, this personal mythos, and how can I kind of expand on it, because I'm thinking, okay, if all these characters exist in this space, it'll be interesting to kind of just, you know, maybe throughout my life or throughout the years that we live in, I'm just building them and expanding upon this world. So drawings like this were kind of like the beginning of me starting to think about these different figures or think about these different characters. So this piece on the left ended up becoming a small watercolor painting. So during my time at the drawing school, that was when I kind of started making watercolor paintings and thinking about, okay, this idea of like, because traditionally my tutors at the drawing school would say, oh, well, watercolor it's not a painting, it's a drawing. And that was something that was a bit of contention in terms of, okay, what is a serious painting? And then tutors were like, oh, you know, but an oil painting is a serious painting. And that was something I was kind of like pushing against a little bit in terms of, okay, this hierarchy of like, what's a serious painting? Does it have to be on canvas? Does it have to be huge to be considered serious? Or, you know, so it was interesting to kind of work with these ideas as well. But a lot of my interest and a lot of the pleasure for me in making the work is just through drawing. I just, you know, love making marks. So it's always fascinating for me to see what you can achieve with just one material. So that's like a piece done just with like a carbon pencil, and that's done with some ink and just like a brush pen. So yeah, I'm always kind of, the sketchbook is a place for me to kind of really play around with things and kind of like develop ideas and see what happens. So I'm just kind of, you know, flip through these just to give you guys a sense of how I might be thinking about things. So sometimes sketches might start off smaller, but then I'm like, okay, I can take this thing from the sketchbook and then maybe, you know, expand it. And the thing with a drawing, every time you make a drawing, you might draw something 3 times, but it changes every time because you're reassessing these marks you're making, you're constantly, you know, rethinking things. So I was always like, okay, it would be interesting for me to break out of the sketchbook as well, because my tutors would say to me, okay, the sketchbook is comfortable, but you need to kind of think about ways you can really expand your practice and think about the scale, all that sort of stuff. So, but you know, initially things would kind of start off like this, and the sketchbook was a good way to kind of start to figure out what I wanted to do with watercolors, because I'm not painting in the kind of European tradition of how watercolors would be used. I'm using them slightly differently. So the sketchbook was a good place to kind of navigate all these ideas. And because, okay, growing up, I've still played video games today, so I'm interested in sci-fi, science, all that. So I would say there are kind of Afrofuturist elements to the work, but it's not necessarily something I'm like, I want to hold on to as like one of the principles framing the work, but it's in there because I'm interested in how the past informs the future and what potentials we could kind of arise from that as well. Just a few more sketches. So one thing that I found that's reoccurring for me is this interest in the child figure, and I think a lot of that kind of goes back to my childhood in Nigeria. So growing up in Nigeria, my grandfather would tell me about sort of like different folktales, different stories, different myths, and that was something, I think storytelling and narrative was something that from a very young age I was really kind of like into, just being around my granddad, you know, telling me these stories. So I was like, oh, you know, storytelling it's a really interesting vehicle in terms of bringing people together and all that sort of stuff. So that was something I was always like, okay, I would like to build upon and think about a bit more. And then also, you know, with the sketchbook, I'm thinking, so, I mean, these you can clearly see. At my time in the drawing school, we have this course called the National Gallery course. So, you know, we go into the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square, we do studies, all that sort of stuff. So at this point, I'm looking at, okay, you know, framing devices used in European painting, all that sort of stuff. How do you frame the figure, all these kinds of things. So I'm like, okay, how can I mix some of these sensibilities and things I'm discovering in a place like the Royal Drawing School with who I am as an African coming to England and encountering these different cultures. So it's been a fascinating journey, really, just to kind of like, because I feel like the work is almost like, because right now if I go to Nigeria, they'll say you're Oyibo boy, so you're basically they'll say, oh, you're European. They wouldn't necessarily class me as Nigerian anymore. They'll be like, okay, you've lived in England enough for you to almost be European now. So I have this weird kind of like, it's this, I guess that's the diasporic identity where you're kind of like in between cultures, you know. So it's been interesting for me to kind of like, because I mean, I love people like El Greco, I love William Blake, you know, so it's been interesting to kind of like play around with these two different interests and cultures and fuse them together. Just flipping through. So I mean, as you can see in the sketchbook, it's I mean, sometimes I might use a pencil, sometimes I use watercolor, or it might just be a pen and ink drawing. So it's a way to kind of just, yeah, really kind of test things out, see what works, see what doesn't work. At one point, I was really into Dura. Funnily enough, I was just in Venice with on a residency with Victor Romero, and I got to see these really lovely Dura prints and some Tiepolos, which were like, you know, blew my mind. So at one point, I was really into this like intense like cross hatching, and also I'm in part quite influenced by Kerry James Marshall because this idea of like skin and how he's painting in this like deep blacks and how do you kind of like communicate that across. So etching and kind of like cross-hatching on the skin as a way to maybe build up the layers of the skin was something I found quite fascinating. And then I'm looking like, as I'm looking at people like Mobius, I'm looking at a lot of like secret art comics, all that sort of stuff. So I'm like, okay, it would be interesting to kind of like play around with this sort of style. So, but for me, I think drawing is kind of, I always say drawing is like the backbone which frames everything else I'm doing, you know? And so these are kind of studies. So another big thing for me was, at my time at the drawing school, I spent a lot of time at the British Museum. The British Museum has this deep, long history of all these objects, which obviously, you know, there's ideas around restitution, okay, how do we return these objects back? But then for me, coming from Nigeria, and then I go, there's a section in the Africa section where there are these Benin plaques. So my family's originally from Benin. And I remember my granddad would tell me about, okay, you know, the Benin Empire, all this sort of, you know, things that happened in our region. And then I come to England and I'm like, oh wow, they do all these bronze plaques in the British Museum. And then you learn, I didn't know anything about the British expedition, which I think it's the 1800s. Basically the Oba of Benin was exiled and they looted, you know, British looted loads of items and stuff. So it was fascinating for me coming from Lagos and then encountering these plaques in the British Museum and then this deep, long history. But then it's conflicting because I'm also like, I'm excited to see these objects in relation to other cultures because I'm like, okay, I can go to the African section downstairs and then I could go upstairs, there's the Asia section, and then I could go up to the top floor, there's Europe. So you find all these like connections between these different cultures, and that was something I found quite fascinating. And I mean, even the layout of the, this is kind of off point, but the layout of the British Museum is quite problematic. So Europe is at the top, Asia is kind of in the middle, and then Africa is in the basement. So it's like, that's this weird like hierarchy in terms of how you view the museum. So that was the place I was like, okay, I spent a lot of time there between the National Gallery and the British Museum. So I'm kind of like, okay, this deep interest in kind of the European tradition of painting and image making. And then I'm going to the British Museum looking at all these visual cultures and how they're putting things together. So yeah, it was fascinating for me to kind of, to really encounter all these things and play around with them as well. But then I'm also thinking, okay, how can I maybe create effigies of my own, or yeah, things like that. So it's been interesting. I feel like things are still developing. There's still many ideas and ways I would like to kind of play around with things. But for me, this interest in mark making is something that really kind of holds me, you know. So I mean, because these two feel quite different, but I'm just like, okay, they're both qualities and things I love from what a brush can do and what a pen can do. So in my mind, I'm always trying to navigate and kind of like balance these two, this deep interest in like this rigorous like drawing and then also painting as well. The show today, I mean, if you do get a chance to come in the evening, it's all just paintings, but it's all underpinned by this deep interest in drawing, you know? Just
like time-wise, like 3 minutes more or something.
So I'll just quickly, you know, just flip through these. So things like this is where ideas around, okay, making watercolors as paintings, they're starting to develop, you know? And I'll just flip through these quickly. And also this interest, like in the sequential, I'm working on these frames, just thinking about the sequence, how that moves through, how we can read images in that sense as well. This was quite interesting because initially I turned this sketch into an oil painting, and there was a period where I tried to make oil paintings, but I just was like, I don't think oil painting is like my thing. So I, you know, scrapped it, dropped it, just went back to what I felt was right for me. That's just a drawing of my mom. I was with her one day. So this, I was in Siena, so at the drawing school we do like a school trip. So we went to the Etruscan Museum and we were talking about Giacometti and these prehistoric Etruscan figures. And that was kind of where this came out of, kind of looking at these Etruscan figures and thinking about like around Giacometti, and yeah, images like that start to arise. So obviously there's this kind of like world I'm building, which is, you know, I'm still kind of figuring out myself really what it's all about really. So, you know, it's the work is constantly building, but I feel like the sketchbook is a place for me to kind of just play around with ideas, experiment, see what's working, see what's not working, and just, yeah. It's just quite fascinating actually. Because also it's that thing of like, oh, you know, one thing I find endlessly fascinating is like, you know, you have a pen or you make a mark, you create a line, you know. And one thing, I remember being young, being in my grandparents' house, being my cousins, we would draw on the walls in my grandparents' house, you know. And I always think about this idea of like us as human beings, like the first ever marks we would have made as human beings on cave walls, all that sort of stuff. So, and this link between like making those marks, okay, you make a drawing of a cow, and maybe that's their way of maybe manifested this to hunt or whatever. You know, so I'm interested in this relationship between the marks we make and the realities we kind of manifest as human beings, because, you know, okay, someone had to make a mark for a chair to exist, right, or for a car or a building and all these things. So it's weird. Yes, things manifest physically, but then, you know, you have to make the plan for the building for it to then be a physical thing, you know. So I'm fascinated by that, you know. And just, you know, just a few more things as well. But, you know, I mean, I don't want to kind of talk too much, but that's essentially, you know, this deep interest in mythos and how that informs who we are and what we are as human beings, because I feel like we're constantly like reassessing ourselves. I mean, okay, I've just become a father, and it's like, okay, there's a whole new way I might view myself, view the world, and my relationships with other people as well. So I'm thinking of this personal mythology as a vehicle, because I don't necessarily want to make autobiographical work, but I'm thinking of mythology being a vehicle for me to kind of think about these different life situations and how I move through them as well. So, I mean, I'll say that's pretty much it for me, really. I don't have much else to say.
We will talk more, so
yeah.
maybe. No, but I thank you for both of you. Yes. My favorite thing to do is to get to know how artists think. But you brought, I mean, it's in a very, you work very differently, and even like in the materialization of your ideas are like as well quite different. But I wanted to speak something that you brought up, and then we can expand from there. One thing that is interesting is about how both of you relate to painting in a very different way, like, you know, like kind of challenging actually the medium. I mean, like, clearly you could call your drawings painting and your paintings could be your social practice, you know? So it's like, so I feel like I'm really interested about, in one way, how you would both approach your practice without a kind of a sort of aesthetic categorization, like, you know, like I feel like sometimes being from the global south, categories are something that is not as stiff or as, you know, like, you know, we always see the copies of things, or, you know, we hear the stories third or fourth hand in relationship to our practices or our histories, or like, you know, like things are like more in a shifting ground as well, because also our lives can be in a shifting ground, and I think that's a very interesting way that you both approach painting. You spoke a little bit, but I know that you also had, from our conversation, how you were looking at painting and how you sort of were like decided to go through, you know, through that medium as well to sort of express the ideas that you were occupied at that time. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, thanks, first of all, for your work. There's something I want to pick up on that you said about mark making, maybe. But I think, at a certain point, someone speaking with the curator, Sarah Rifke, many years ago, and we were talking about this decision to move back into painting, also as a sort of economic one, because at the time, you know, I was sort of teaching all over the place, and in South Africa, you know, it's you know, selling paintings is also a way of making a living. Thank goodness. I mean, it's really important for me because it's a way of then not making sure, but like sort of really thoroughly working through an idea, and that the idea doesn't necessarily even. It might not even be the primary thing that the painting is about, but for me, somehow, it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. You know, it's interesting because, yeah, you have totally different speeds, I feel, no? It's like you're like, I mean, it's really, when we talked, you didn't show I was not introduced to his practice through the notebook, which is, so it's really interesting because we were much more starting to speak about things that you had in your studio as well, and we did talk about as well, like this idea that oil wasn't your thing, but also the transition between like drawing, textile, and then painting, and it would be really interesting because it was kind of, I mean, you mentioned it that you were doing textile, and somehow your teachers were like, you're thinking too much. This is like a pattern, but I think there is. I mean, it has informed the way that you think as well. It will be really interesting to know like how that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with the work, I specialize in print design. So a lot of what I was doing was kind of like working with like natural dyes. Like, so what's interesting is that watercolor as a medium has this opacity and transparency, translucent. You can build it up, and funnily enough, in print design, I'm working with screens, right? So I'm working across several different screens to build up an image. And it's interesting, those same sensibilities translate quite well into working with a medium like watercolor. So you can work between these layers. And it was quite weird. I was like, okay, yeah, this is like perfect. It's like, it just fit really well, you know? And I'm like, okay. And another thing that I would say that kind of really took from textiles was, during my time at CSM, I read John Berger's on Ways of Seeing, and also just about his interaction of color. And that was something that I was like, wow, color is its own thing. So it was fascinating for me to kind of, I'm also not just thinking of color as like a filler, but also serves and performs a function in terms of, okay, what's your association with a particular shade of red, or what's your association with a blue, or, you know, so it was interesting that I think all these textile things, they're not lost, they're still there, but it's like they've just been translated into a slightly different medium and they're looked at in a different way. So it's weird because I mean, for me, making the work is, I think there's also a deep kind of like, how do I describe it? I'm not necessarily, not everything for me is like grounded in this reality, there are also other things, like I'm thinking about my ancestors, I'm thinking about things like that, so I think there's this other kind of metaphysical aspect to making the work, and like you said, it's almost like sacred duty, because like my family's from Benin, and I'm like, my history and tradition of a bronze maker, so it makes sense I would want to make in that sort of way, and these objects, because also one thing that's fascinating with like the Edo region of Benin, we don't have written language, so the only way information was recorded was through the bronze plaques. So that was the way of passing on information and knowledge over time, because nothing was ever written down. So it's fascinating for me to see, okay, maybe that's why I said, okay, I'm recording these things, but it's not like, I want to put myself in like, this is my life and this is what happened, but I'm using it as a vehicle to kind of explore those things. And in relation to like, being an artist and working, it's like, you need to make a living, you need to kind of like, and I think that's something I kind of got to a point and I was kind of like, okay, this is the nature of the world we're in right now. And I think the most important thing for me is like, okay, how can I still keep my integrity while still being able to, make a living out of this and, get my work out there, but then also feel like, okay, the work has a usefulness beyond just aesthetics, right? So it's, I guess I can imagine you probably think the same of like, how do you navigate those two things and how do you balance all of that together? Because then, okay, the art market can be quite voracious. It's like, how do you navigate that and put that all together and still make something that you feel proud of and that's like you want to share with society? That
Yes, trust the work in a way, trust your own practice, no?
Yeah, like I think in relationship with these ideas that you're bringing and also is present in your work, and I think history it's very present, like some sort of a reflection of, what we know that, or how history has been even narrated, and what other narration we should even, even imagine, not only visibilize whatever is there that hasn't been amplified, but as well imagine in order to, nurture an imagination for other futures to happen as well. And in relationship, I think, for instance, in your work as well, this I think there is this, you even in the videos you have, this kind of archival word where, things didn't appear yesterday. There is like a history that we have to remember, but there is also a history that we have to construct today. And there is also very present in both practices, I feel there is some sense of affection, like the affection between the gymnastics, that they are doing something very precise, that they need a lot of concentration and, very meditative, and even, even it's not about the performing, it's just the moment before. And there is this moments as well of being together that is nice as well. It's almost like the performance is kind of withdraw from the practice, and whereas it's the befores and afters, what it takes to construct something to be performed. And there is a lot of affection, and I remember you mentioned here that you are a recent father, and at that time you were going to become one, and we were talking as well as a lot about as well like a history, and you have mentioned here as well like how is your ancestors and like your grandmother as well. And our conversation had to do a lot more with family, like how the family somehow, and that you were like thinking very much about those relationships as some sort of structures. And I think I don't know if I have a question specifically, but I wanted you to talk much more about, there is many structures that are like before us and will be after us, that are kind of imposed, and maybe the ones that we're trying to shake, and sometimes we get some, a change, necessary change, sometimes not. But there is like a real sort of desire, I feel, or like intention from both of you to show like a structure of affection, and how relevant is that? And I don't know, maybe you both can talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I've just yeah, I mean, I think you said it, but I think, yeah, for me, you know, maybe just a quick thing I'll say is like I think about the what I can leave I have a 7-year-old, a 7-day-old, or a few day old, and I think of the ways that in which I want to equip her for the future, and they have to do with making community. I think that that's when I'm feeling like very hopeless about the planet and about our ability to work through our issues. I just think about the necessity of being in community, and that doesn't just mean, you know, like love and affection. That means like working through your own things in order to be with others, you know, and to be aware of others. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so my granddad had 2 wives and 12 kids, so when you think about the idea of affection and how those dynamics can change, and it's like, okay, there's like I said, even this idea of the hierarchy, right? My grandmother was his first wife, and then his second wife lived behind the house, so there's already this like, who gets affection, who doesn't get affection, and how that all changes and how that moves throughout the family. So it's I mean, I grew up in quite a chaotic household, so it's like, even the idea of affection for me is so, it's varied and it changes, right? It changes at many different points, and then like I said, okay, coming to England, it's like, oh wow, okay, now I'm in England and maybe people might see me a certain way, but then you go to the British Museum and you find all these connections. I'm like, oh wow, you know, in China there is a similar thing there, and there's some kind of like, you know, so that was a really interesting point for me in terms of building these commonalities. And that's something I'm fascinated with in terms of the work, is how do I build these commonalities across maybe cultures or across things where we see each other in a different way, not just, okay, by race, creed, or class or whatever, but you know, there is some kind of deeper commonality that we can maybe build upon, especially in the world we live in today. I mean, it's, you know, we don't know how crazy it is in terms of all these different gender dynamics, economic, everything, you know, so it's like, how do you find ways to kind of like, and obviously now I'm having a daughter, my partner is mixed race, half of her family are white and English, and then her grandmother came to England in the 40s, where her grandfather, who was a colonial worker working in Nigeria in the 40s, brought her grandmother to England. So it's like, you know, and now we're all together as one big family, so it's interesting in terms of even how we're like navigating this identity, and like now our child is an amalgamation of all these different histories and cultures together. So it's like, wow, you know, we could find ways to kind of connect, and that's why, you know, for me, I think when in terms of the work, maybe a kind of deeper message or a deeper purpose is like, yeah, you know, there are commonalities. Like, I mean, Augusto's here in the audience, and he's someone who's been like really helpful and instrumental, but I don't know him from anywhere, you know, so it's like, wow, you know, you can find people who you have these deep affinities with, and you build upon those, and that's something, I don't know, maybe it's a bit utopian of me, but I'm like, hey, no idealist, but I'm like, you know, maybe it helps, you know, maybe it helps, so,
Yeah, yes, definitely yes. I mean, the time is kind of almost there, but I wanted, maybe if anyone had a question, I would be happy to, yes, please. And another.
So, I think I want to start the question with like the story, because I also paint, but like my relationship to painting is a lot more personal. Like, I don't really want to mix, respectfully, I really want to mix like capitalism and my blackness in that sense. And I lost one of my paintings a while ago, but one of the main reasons why I made it in the first place is because I wanted to live in a space where I had a lot of light, and it was like COVID and stuff like that, and my apartment didn't get a lot of light. So I made that painting, and I was able to move to a brownstone after that, and it had like amazing light and stuff like that. I lived in the space for like 2 years, and then when I had to move from that space to a place that was less light, I lost the painting, and it was like completely like Pakistan and stuff like that. But like my family's from Trinidad, and we have a lot of like Nigerians there in the same trade, so like the new process a lot, and like lost like those kinds of like story things that mean a lot to me. But like calling like power back actually giving away art, things like that as well. It's like a very interesting process to me. Like, I wanted to see if you guys had any words about that.
I mean, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one because, like I said, for me, something like the British Museum is conflicting, you know. Because also I was teaching at the Royal Drawing School, and maybe I'll just one thing. So I created a course at the Royal Drawing School called World Imagery. So because one thing I noticed is like the focus at the school was mainly on the European canon, and I was like, okay, I would like for us to look outside, being one of 2 black students on a course. So I was like, okay, it would be good for us to look outside of the European canon and see commonalities. And I'll tell you now, I've had classes. It was crazy during the BLM period. I had these classes where I was looking at these Asafo flags. From the Ghana region. So the Asafo were kind of like a war kind of like tribe, and they had these relationships with the British, right? So they had these flags with Union Jacks on them, right? And then we were having a conversation, and there was a lady on Zoom from like Texas or something, and she like burst out into tears, like, "Oh my God, I didn't know there was this connection." So it's like it was interesting for me for people. They're not even aware that there might be these commonalities, you know, and I think, you know, hey, that's the power of art. You know, we can use it as a vehicle to kind of maybe bring people together, or kind of, you know, find these common points that you might not necessarily see, or you know, might not necessarily. So I think in a sense, and also just on a basic kind of like teaching level, you know, you teach a student and you see them get through a drawing or a painting, and you see this like joy or this like sense of confidence, and like, oh wow, I'm able to do this. It's like one of the most amazing feelings to be able to kind of, because I believe as an educator, all I'm there is to facilitate somebody's growth. I'm not interested in like, you need to do it this way or that way for you to be, because through art school I had a lot of that from certain tutors where it's like, oh, this is how you make a painting, this is how you da. So it's I'm interested in like, yeah, how do you facilitate the growth of someone's power for themselves, not necessarily for me or my ego. So I get that's kind of how I would maybe address. I don't know if that makes sense or helps your question, but
like from an educational standpoint, the art work stands in the point of educating others on like finding themselves in the point.
yeah, you know, so yeah, exactly. I would like for people to maybe, you know, if they look at the work, then maybe it gives them a reason to maybe do some research or so whatever it is, you know. But I don't want to. It's not like a directive to say, oh, you need to do this, but yeah, it's a suggestion. It's a suggestion, and one thing we talk about at the drawing school when we're teachers, like this idea of like pastoral care, and you gently you nudge, you gently just kind of nudge someone in the right direction, but you want them to find out for themselves, not because you said so, right? You know, so it's yeah.
You have to do that now that you're a father.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. You want to answer, or should we go to the next question?
And you wanted to listen.
Yes, I was, first of all, thank you both. I just have, and all of you actually, for this conversation. It's so satisfying. So I was thinking about you mentioning, Thenjiwe, like how long it takes to paint a piece, and then the presence of this stopwatch, which I absolutely loved in the video piece, and a sense of you sort of knowing about this realm of external timing and these performances that happen in a frame of time versus the extended time that you need to give yourself, and how those two senses of time complement each other in the process of your life and your work. So, and there's a lot of and it also is evocative to me of how in this you know, exhibiting this video piece here in the United States in this political environment where it's often people will claim that these histories of colonialism and imperialism can't be contemplated because there isn't enough time, and we have to deal with the people who are alive now, and you manage in a matter of seconds to move through and really highlight so many facets. Like, is it a part of your process to have something that moves so quickly and then something that's crafted over months? Like, what does that do for you to have that range of options?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a funny way, they're like, I mean, when you look at a painting, it's a quick
True.
experience, and so making both of them took a lot of time and a lot of like coming back and you know, sort of contemplating what I'd done and then making changes. But yeah, I mean, I think all of the work is about wrestling with time, whether it's like the time that I'm giving myself to think and or the space that I give myself, which I'm taking now, I'm taking a sabbatical, or if it's just thinking about, yeah, I mean, that the video piece, the same track, is about, you know, sort of collapsing the time into a race so that you sort of see a trajectory in history, you know, like quite quickly, you know, so it's trying to make a point. You don't have to read 50 books to know what's going on right now, you know, because it's like, I mean, for me, that was what was so crazy about these images, is that they immediately revealed that it's the same process, it's the same tactics and strategy, it's manifest, you know, for me, I always noticed that, I was just happy about this one edit, like the tea leaves now and the tea leaves throughout time, you know, the tea is just being harvested and grown and shipped out, you know, it's like just this perfect, yeah, symbol and reality, you know, like, sign of what is happening. So,
I also felt like you assert that there's no such thing as a spectator, even in a stadium, that we're all participating in this life and we're all reinforcing or resisting.
yeah,
You know, there's no such thing as a spectator.
yeah. That's how it feels, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I had a quick question just related to television. Richard, you mentioned specifically a lot of early influences as far as like being able to get a hold of media. Nigeria can be a television. I sense sort of like different films, and of course, Thenjiwe, your use of it sort of like the broadcast via the Olympics. It's not a specific question, it's just sort of related, I think, hopefully a little bit to being passive or, you know, active within it. Not that there's one or the other, but maybe just talk if you're interested to like about television.
I mean, TV, so in Lagos we would get like reruns of like stuff from like the US. So it's like you get like, and it's that thing because we, you know, it's like you're a kid, you don't know what time it comes. And it's like, okay, I need to go home and watch Dragon Ball Z because we might get episode 25 and you don't know when the next episode's going to come on. So it's like you get these weird like remnants, and maybe sometimes things aren't contextualized. So you're getting these weird like little like bits of information. And I remember like a cousin of mine we used to love Naruto, and my cousin had like recorded some episodes of a tape, and me and my brother watched that tape to death because it was like played it all because that's all we had access to. So, so it's interesting that, you know, even this idea of like information, and I guess it goes back, you know, if you think about colonial history and like information, bite-sized information, what do you know about what's not contextualized. So it's interesting, and then okay, I come to Europe, okay, now, oh, Naruto didn't do that in that episode, because, so it's really interesting in terms of like information and how we process and how we use it and how your perception of certain things can be shaped differently. And when you have the full picture, it's like, oh wow, okay, I'm illuminated now. Now I know what this actually means, or now I know what this actually represents. So it was weird for me, like you encounter bits of a thing home, and then you come here and then you get the full picture. Like with the bronze plaques for me, for instance, I knew about them from my granddad speaking about them, but then I come to the British Museum and it's a whole thing, and it's like, you hear people in the artwork like, oh, the brilliant bronzes. I was like, yeah, that's just stuff my granddad told me about like all the time, you know. So it's interesting in terms of, yeah, maybe having this loss of information and sometimes not getting the full picture and how that you form your own ideas, you fill in the gaps, you know, because you might not have the full picture. So yeah, if that's, I don't know if that kind of answers the question a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it sort of formally and otherwise, but I use video images for my paintings, or film images. So I take stills, and I was going to say that sort of what's been interesting about using, like sort of, I've gotten some access to archives, but you know, the full length of things has been useful to me. So for example, a lot of the gymnastics paintings or stills that I took came out of like 3-hour competitions, you know, where the cameras are just like often rolling beyond, you know, the competition. So I love the sort of, I mean, so videos really like offered me this way of, you know, because it's throwaway and no one's concerned about editing things, that I have so much to work with, so much of this in between time, other than the performances to work with. And similarly, a little bit with some of the older film, particularly from the Commonwealth or the Olympics, is that there is some sort of B-roll that I had access to that was really useful for me, and you know, because I don't want the edited version. I want to see what was left out, or what someone, you know, what happened when the camera was set down, or when something was accidentally captured. So yeah, that, I mean, I'm sort of speaking more to like the medium of, you know, and how it's materially useful to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the two of you for your generosity. And yeah, we have a day ahead.